But okay, this is the main event, I guess. So I'm gonna do my best to stay on track and not lose my train of thought and fucking like just talk about this thing in a very digestible manner. I think we should start this off with just defining what the mental stack actually is. So what actually is the mental stack? For general purposes, the mental stack is the amount of things, or the stack in this case, of things that you have to look for at once, right? This is tied very closely to reactions. So things that you can react to in this game, like this move here, like Kai doing this to you, Kai doing this, right? All of these options that they actually have that they can do, whether it be in neutral or on defense, are related to the mental stack, basically. Because these moves do have responses. There are things that you can do to stop them from doing these moves, right? You can stop Kai from doing this, right? You just hit him out of it, right? You can stop Kai from doing this, you just hit him out of it. But the problem is you can't look for and defend everything at once. That is the entire basis of the mental stack. Okay, so let's talk about defense, right? If they're missing up their offense or what they're doing to like reset their pressure, for instance, it becomes a lot harder to deal with things that are typically very slow and easy to react to. The main difference about how it works in Strive is that because like system offense is very strong in this game, it applies mostly to pressure resets, right? So in BlazBlue, for example, throws are reactable. Overheads, for the most part, are reactable. System offense as a whole is like very easy to deal with as long as you're like, you know, just kind of not sleep, right? In this game, throws are unreactable, right? If someone's in your face and they do this, right, or this, you just have to guess on it. You can't see the startup of this, obviously, right? Also, as far as like system offense goes, you also have Dust. Dust is nigh unreactable. It's like 20 frames, which is like seeable, but it's hard. It's definitely hard to see this, right? Like, and this is strong. Every character can do this. It's a universal overhead. They give it like the orange glow to like kind of make it easier to see, like more of a tell, but it's still hard. That's like the main difference between like BB, for example, in this game, right? So that's why mental stacking normally applies on pressure resets, right? Because this is what gives them an opportunity to do these unreactable things to you, right? Letting Kai do this to you and then running up, and now he has a chance to be extremely plus and throw you, which you can't really like see, you just have to guess on it, right? And the only way to stop him from getting that situation, because Kai doesn't really get to be plus like that, he has to like go out of his way or like have shock state on and do something like this to be plus. It's to stop them from doing the move that gives them that advantageous state, right? Their pressure reset. Right? So on the Kai side of things, he kind of wants you to be looking for the thing that he isn't going to do, basically, if that makes sense, right? So Kai is going to knock you down, shock state you, right? Doing his offense, he wants to do this. He wants to do this because it resets his pressure, it makes him plus, gives him a very strong strike throw scenario, right? Which can potentially lead to a lot of return, right? So he wants you to be looking for something that's not this, right? Like the way for him to actually get this move off is by utilizing the mental stack correctly. Before I like talk a little bit deeper about like how you actually utilize this in a fighting game, or Strive specifically, I want to talk about like just as a basis what's actually reactable in fighting games, right? Let's go back a little bit, because depending on who you ask, right? Me personally, like 18 frames is like you can't see, you cannot, it's invisible, right? 18 frames is invisible, you can't see it, right? 18 below is like straight up unreactable, you can't see it, right? 19 frames to me is like, I think 19 frames is like you can see it, but like not really. Like let's be honest, like people say like it's reactable, but nah, you're not seeing that. I'm gonna be honest, like 19 is still just like, because Gen 6A and BlazBlue is 19 frames, nobody blocks that shit for like years and years. Nobody blocks Gen 6A. Like you can see it, especially depending on how you want to respond. If you like want to overdrive instead of like trying to block it, like there are things you can do, but it's fucking hard, like especially when he has other things that he can do, right? Once you start getting to around 20 frames, 20 is like hard but seeable, right? Like Dust, for example, that's why they give it the orange tell on here to like make it a little bit easier on you. Around 24 to 26 frames is like you don't really have to be looking for this so hard to defend against it, and 30 frames and above is like, as long as you're not asleep, you will see this. You don't have to be looking for it at all. Yeah, that entire concept plays into like the things that you'll commonly see in Strive, right? Because a lot of these moves that people will use as special resets have really big gaps on them and like really obvious startups, right? And even like Charge Dust, for example, this is 28 frames. This is like getting to that point where like as long as you're not asleep, you can see this. This move hits people for another reason in this game, but I'm not gonna talk about it today because it's really like not as important or related, right? Of course, there are caveats to this kind of thing, though. Like I said, like they give this move the orange tail on here to make it a little bit easier, but some moves have really like subtle animations, for example, which can make it harder to defend against. I think a good example is maybe like Milia, right? So Milia will sneak this in her pressure, right? And it can be hard to see because it looks like she doesn't crouch or anything, right? It's kind of hard to tell what she's actually doing until later into the move, but you can see her do this and be like, oh, I'm gonna hit you out of it. Right, but notice how she doesn't like, she barely does anything actually. Like she slides forward, it kind of disappears for a bit. It's kind of hard to see this. Another thing that layers the situation out a little bit more is what you actually have to do to respond versus the move. For example, I'm probably going to be using BB a lot because like it's really good to talk about this kind of concept. But in that game, overdrive is the thing that you can do. You press 4 buttons and you basically pause the game with invincibility and get to see what's going on, and potentially punish like if a move whiffs during your overdrive. So it's easier to react to things with OD than it is to block it in some instances because it takes the load off on like I have to guess correctly. Overdrive is like a beats all option. You basically like you're invo the entire time. You get to see you're safe no matter what, right? If you kind of like even guess what an overdrive, you see them like do something and you twitch and you're like, oh, I'm gonna overdrive through this, like the overhead is coming, and you're wrong. You didn't like really see it so much, right? It's still all good, right? Because the game is paused basically and you're pretty much safe. It's easier to do that than the block, right? Sometimes you have to jump out of things, sometimes you have to backdash, sometimes you have to mash straight up, right? Your response is different depending on what it is they're actually doing to you. So to bring that back to Kai, right? Like I said, the two things that you do versus these like 2 pressure resets is typically mash. Typically like just hit a button and hit him out of it. Right? You see him do this move and then you jab him out of it. Like, oh, he's gonna do food arc and I'm gonna hit him out of it basically. But the response on that is different than the response on, he doesn't have any more pressure resets actually. So Kai's probably not the best example on this, but actually no, this is probably still fine actually. Because if he does this and you're looking for food arc, it's like, oh, this is food arc. Never mind, her 5P is good as fuck. Her 5P is good as fuck. Alright, let's try Soul. Okay, let's try this, right? So if Soul tries a jab, this is the same response, right? If Soul tries a jab, it hits nothing and he gets hit, right? What you do is different and it makes it like harder, basically. The reason why this is important is because it plays into very heavily into like offense, and you can make your offense very strong if you understand this concept. Also, this happens in neutral as well. This is the reason why like when Ram is playing really fast and doing like a whole lot of air dashing back and like dashing at you like this, right? It becomes a lot harder to anti-air her when she actually does dash forward because you're looking for the forward movement. You're trying to like stop her like forward approach, and then she air dashes and the response is different. You have to 6P when she air dashes at you, right? But if she's doing this and you want to stop her from doing this, like 6P is usually not the option, because if you flinch at this and whiff, she's gonna hit you, right? So like it makes things harder to deal with. The general concept of it is you can't look for everything and see it at once. Basically, the way that you use this to your advantage, like how do I actually use the mental stack to my advantage, is by creating and then subverting expectations. And what I mean by that is you have to give your opponent something to look for, something that is disadvantageous for them, something they don't want you to do. In this case, Kai doing this, right? This is a really good example, so I'm gonna keep using it. Kai doing this to you is like good for him. He's like plus 1 million off of this, right? And he can like get a bunch of stuff off of this, like he can BRC, right? And it's completely airtight the entire time. This is a super high reward for him to actually get off. And by him doing this and showing this option, it is important for you to show this option, right? You have to do it. Or like showing that you'll even do frame traps, for example, right? And then they're looking for frame traps or like staggers. This kind of stuff opens up the opportunity for you to do this, right? You create the opportunity, right? Like, oh, he likes to do close slash into this, right? So let me look for this to deal with it, right? And then he does something completely different. Like you create the expectation with this, and then you subvert it by doing this instead, right? And these are all checks on your opponent to see like where they're at on defense and what it is they're actually looking for. You have to mix up the options constantly. So something that you probably see me do a bunch with Geo is this. I do this a ton. This is a 22 frame situation. The dash is 22 frames and it is -4 on block. So you can actually like see her do this and hit throw on reaction and punish her in that 4 frame window with throw is doable. But if you're late on it and she like delays her timing or like gives you other things to look for, then it becomes a lot harder to deal with this, right? Immediate cancel into this is like, if you're looking for this one thing, you can deal with it 100% of the time, right? But if she does this instead, this is hard to see actually, because you're looking for like the cancel on this, right? And then she staggers and then just dashes in and throws you, right? And the response on this is different than the response on this, Hitting throw on this is like, you can do it, but if you mess up the timing, you die, right? It's not really the best option. Typically, if you want like fuzzy jump these kind of things too, right? Like you can't fuzzy jump this. I mean, you can't even just straight up up back it even, right? If you hold up, she just jails you, right? So she does this, and I just up back, jailed, right? Really bad for me. And so to stop her from doing this, right? This is a disadvantageous situation for me. I don't want her to do this. I have to stop it, and I have to look for it in order to stop it. It's reactable, right? So you see this, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna throw you out of it, right? But because you're looking for this, and she does this instead, right? Oh wait, throw tech window is really good actually. Say you pick fuzzy jump on this, right? You can fuzzy jump out of the throw, but you can't fuzzy jump out of this. So using this to your advantage is basically all about like delaying your timings, because she can also just, because you're looking for a meter cancel, she can delay it and then do this instead, and it achieves the same effect basically. Really hard to see this, and then she also has her 2 special moves, which work similar to this. These are both reactable as well. Spiral Arrow, 27 frames, plus 2 on block. This is 30 frames and plus 4 on block, right? And the response to this is 6p, right? But you can like hit a button on this even, like if you're looking for it, right? You can 6p, be like, oh, I'm invincible, right? Very like good response to this. The problem, just like with the other examples that I mentioned, is that she can delay her timings and also do other things. I think one of the most important things about this kind of concept that a lot of people don't really realize or think about is that your option set, off of what you're doing it from, like straight up like affects this, right? It affects this a lot. For example, this is something that Deb was actually talking about this like a while back, like versus Giovanna, where like a lot of Geo players will do 5 heavy and then special cancel, right? This is like kind of not the best, because the only thing she can do to keep her turn is this move, basically, right? Either dash back in or do the special move, right? So at the end of this string, when your options are exhausted, right? Because all the characters can do the same thing in this game, basically. Like, Stry streamlined like Gatling tables, so every character can do K into D, every character can do S into H, right? Like, the entire Gatling chart is the same for every character, so once you get to this point in the string, you have no more options. You can't jump cancel and use normals, for example, right? Like, the only thing the opponent has to be looking for is a pressure reset. So if they're looking, right, like, no matter like how you delay it, really, like, they're going to see it. It becomes a lot easier to sneak these things in when you do it from places where you have a ton of options, right? So close slash, for example. Close slash, you can do a bunch off of this. You can jump cancel this, right? To reset pressure, you can air dash, right? You can dash cancel it if you're a certain kind of character, right? It's special cancelable, right? You can go right into sweep, right? You can go into command normals. There's a bunch of things that you can do off of this, right? And this makes it a lot harder to gauge what you actually want to do afterwards, and a lot easier for you to actually get the pressure reset off, right? And the thing that you kind of want to keep in mind here is that because you can't look for everything at once, it's important to just pick the thing that you think is the least, pick the thing that you think is the most dangerous for them to actually get. Right, so you want to consider like the risk return on what it is they're actually doing to you, right? You really don't want Kai to do this to you at all. You don't want him doing this shit. This is really bad, right? Him doing this is bad as well, but it gets rid of his shock state, right? It gets rid of shock state, and he gets his 1 chance at strike throw off of this, right? Him doing this is like a complete reset of the situation. This is really bad. You don't want him doing this at all. Right, so when you're on defense and you're thinking about the mental stack, the way to kind of make this easier for yourself is to consider like what is the worst case scenario for you, and like kind of lean towards that. You do have to divide your attention, but looking at the resources, like how much health do I have, how much meter do they have, how much risk do I have burst, do they have burst, that kind of thing. You want to factor that into your decision making on what it is you actually want to choose to look for. Characters that probably do this the most, even because there are characters that this isn't like straight up about pressure resets even. I think Chipp is like the god at mental stack, actually. Chipp is straight up like maybe the best character to exemplify this, because technically everything he does is reactable. You can see the moves that he does to actually try to open you up, right? Alpha Blade, like both of the Alpha Blades, P and K Alpha, you can see that, right? You can see command grab, you can see him doing, well, maybe you can't see him doing this move. I don't know. Reacting to this move isn't typically how I deal with it. I kind of just guess on it, to be honest. Characters that also like do this a bunch is like Leo, for example. He has like a situation that's really good for him if you let him do Berserker Slash to you, right? If you actually block Berserker Slash cross up, he's +2. If he hits you, he gets his game started, basically, right? He gets to do it again if he wants to. Nago also does this with like Fukyo versus like like raw Fukyo versus like button into Fukyo. Reacting to Fukyo is something that's very important versus this character. And I'm not gonna talk about different platforms of the game or anything because that shit really doesn't matter. But for most intents and purposes, when he does button, right, you kind of just want to be checking Fukyo, like, oh, he did Fukyo, let me hit a button, right, to stop him from doing this. Right, this is like a reliable thing that you can do. But if he staggers and then like, actually let's do the string instead. Like 5k into Fukyo, right? This becomes very easy to see because you're looking for it, right? You see the forward movement, you're like, oh, let's hit a button, right? Like there's a total, a very like sizable total duration on this move, right? Where he can't do anything but get hit. So if he does this move's neutral on block, right? If he does this and then waits and does this is a lot harder to react to than him just doing it after a button, right? Because from this neutral state, he can do a ton of things, right? He can hit another button, like he can do like 5k, right? He can walk back, hit 2s, he can hit 5 heavy, right? He can Beyblade if he wants to, right? That moment that he stops, like basically just makes it so you're like, subconsciously you look for the other things that he's going to do. Basically you're like, okay, like he didn't do anything after this button, right? He's probably gonna pick something else, right? And then he picks the thing that you were probably looking for to begin with, this right here, and this becomes a lot harder to deal with. That's basically the entire concept behind this, right? But that's basically it. This isn't like a super long talk or anything. This is just like what the mental stack actually is, how it works, and like basically how to use it. The number one thing to keep in mind if you take nothing else away from this video, it'll make your offense a lot stronger if you internalize this concept. It is basically like create and then subvert the expectations, right? The reason why this example that I just mentioned worked is because he set the precedent that you're gonna do this, basically, right? They're looking for this, right? And then you do this instead, right? That's the most important part, right? So it varies on character, honestly, on like how this actually looks, but like the concept is the same amongst everybody. Is Nago cool? Not even the slightest. Fuck that character. Any other questions? Any other questions?